Section 18 of Beacon Lights of History, Volume 3, Ancient Achievements, by John Lord. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by K. Hand. Cleopatra, Part 1. 69 to 30 B.C. The Woman of Paganism. It is my object in this lecture to present the condition of woman under the influences of paganism, before Christianity enfranchised and elevated her. As a type of the pagan woman I select Cleopatra, partly because she was famous and partly because she possessed traits and accomplishments which made her interesting in spite of the vices which degraded her. She was a queen, the heir of a long line of kings, and ruled over an ancient and highly civilized country. She was intellectual, accomplished, beautiful, and fascinating. She lived in one of the most interesting capitals of the ancient world, and by birth she was more Greek than she was African or Oriental. She lived, too, in a great age, when Rome had nearly conquered the world, when Roman senators and generals had more power than kings, when Grecian arts and literature were copied by the imperial Romans, when the rich and fortunate were luxurious and ostentatious beyond all precedent, when life had reached the highest point of material splendor, and yet when luxury had not destroyed military virtues or undermined the strength of the empire. The Eternal City then numbered millions of people, and was the grandest capital ever seen on this earth, since everything was there concentrated: the spoils of the world, riches immeasurable, literature and art, palaces and temples, power unlimited, the proudest center of civilization which then existed, and a civilization which in its material aspects has not since been surpassed. The civilized world was then most emphatically pagan, in both spirit and forms. Religion as a controlling influence was dead. Only a very few among speculative philosophers believed in any god, except in a degrading sense, as a blind, inexorable fate or an impersonation of the powers of nature. The future state was a most perplexing uncertainty. Epicurean self-indulgence and material prosperity were regarded as the greatest good, and as doubt of the darkest kind hung over the future, the body was necessarily regarded as of more value than the soul. In fact, it was only the body which paganism recognized as a reality; the soul, God, and immortality were virtually everywhere ignored. It was in this godless yet brilliant age that Cleopatra appears upon the stage, having been born 69 years before Christ, about a century before the new revolutionary religion was proclaimed in Judea. Her father was a Ptolemy, and she succeeded him on the throne of Egypt when quite young, the last of a famous dynasty that had reigned nearly 300 years. The Ptolemies, descended from one of Alexander's generals, reigned in great magnificence at Alexandria, which was the commercial center of the world, whose ships whitened the Mediterranean, that great inland lake, as it were, in the center of the Roman Empire, around whose shores were countless cities and villas and works of art. Alexandria was a city of schools, of libraries and museums, of temples and of palaces, as well as a mart of commerce. Its famous library was the largest in the world, and was the pride of the age and of the empire. Learned men from all countries came to this capital to study science, philosophy, and art. It was virtually a Grecian city, and the language of the leading people was Greek. It was rivaled in provincial magnificence only by Antioch, the seat of the old Syrian civilization, also a Greek capital, so far as the governing classes could make it one. Greece, politically ruined, still sent forth those influences which made her civilization potent in every land. Cleopatra, the last of the line of Grecian sovereigns in Egypt, was essentially Greek in her features, her language, and her manners. There was nothing African about her, as we understand the term African, except that her complexion may have been darkened by the intermarriage of the Ptolemies; and I have often wondered why so learned and classical a man as Story should have given to this queen, in his famous statue, such thick lips and African features, which no more marked her than Indian features mark the family of the Braganzas on the throne of Brazil. She was not even Coptic, like Athanasius and Saint Augustine. On the ancient coins and medals her features are severely classical. Nor is it probable that any of the peculiarities of the ancient Egyptian kings marked the dynasty of the Ptolemies. No purely Egyptian customs lingered in the palaces of Alexandria. The old deities of Isis and Osiris gave place to the worship of Jupiter, Minerva, and Venus. The wonders of pristine Egypt were confined to Memphis and Thebes and the dilapidated cities of the Nile. The mysteries of the antique Egyptian temples were no more known to the learned and mercantile citizen of Alexandria than they are to us. The pyramids were as much a wonder then as now. The priests and jugglers alike mingled in the crowd of Jews, Syrians, Romans, Greeks, Parthians, Arabs, who congregated in this learned and mercantile city. So we have a right to presume that Cleopatra, when she first appeared upon the stage of history as a girl of 14, was simply a very beautiful and accomplished Greek princess, who could speak several languages with fluency, as precocious as Elizabeth of England, skilled in music, conversant with history, and surrounded with eminent masters. She was only 21 when she was an object of attraction to Caesar, then in the midst of his triumphs. How remarkable must have been her fascinations, if at that age she could have diverted, even for a time, the great captain from his conquests and chained him to her side. That refined, intellectual old veteran of 50, with the whole world at his feet, loaded down with the cares of government, as temperate as he was ambitious, and bent on new conquests, would not have been chained and enthralled by a girl of 21, however beautiful, had she not been as remarkable for intellect and culture as she was for beauty. Nor is it likely that Cleopatra would have devoted herself to this weather-beaten old general had she not hoped to gain something from him besides caresses, namely the confirmation of her authority as a queen. She also may have had some patriotic motives touching the political independence of her country. Left by her father's will at the age of 18, joint heir of the Egyptian throne with her brother Ptolemy, she soon found herself expelled from the capital by him and the leading generals of the army, because they did not relish her precocious activity in government. Her gathered adherents had made but little advance toward regaining her rights, when, in August, 48, Caesar landed in pursuit of Pompey, whom he had defeated at Pharsalia. Pompey's assassination left Caesar free, and he proceeded to Alexandria to establish himself for the winter. Here the wily and beautiful young exile sought him, and won his interest and his affection. After some months of revelry and luxury, Caesar left Egypt in 47 to chastise an Eastern rebel, and was in 46 followed to Rome by Cleopatra, who remained there in splendid state until the assassination of Caesar drove her back to Egypt. Her whole subsequent life showed her to be as cunning and politic as she was luxurious and pleasure-seeking. Possibly she may have loved so interesting and brilliant a man as the great Caesar, aside from the admiration of his position, but he never became her slave, although it was believed, 100 years after his death, that she was actually living in his house when he was assassinated, and was the mother of his son Cicero. But Froude doubts this, and the probabilities are that he is correct, for, like Macaulay, he is not apt to be wrong in facts, but only in the way he puts them. Cleopatra was 28 years of age when she first met Antony, a period of life, says Plutarch, when woman's beauty is most splendid and her intellect is in full maturity. We have no account of the style of her beauty, except that it was transcendent, absolutely irresistible, with such a variety of expression as to be called infinite. As already remarked, from the long residence of her family in Egypt and intermarriages with foreigners, her complexion may have been darker than that of either Persians or Greeks. It probably resembled that of Queen Esther more than that of Aspasia, in that dark richness and voluptuousness which to some have such attractions, but in grace and vivacity she was purely Grecian, not like a blooming Eastern bride, languid and passive and effeminate, but bright, witty, and intellectual. Shakespeare paints her as full of lively sallies, with the power of adapting herself to circumstances with tact and good nature, like a Madame Récamier or a Maintenon, rather than like a Montespan or a Pompadour, although her nature was passionate, her manner enticing, and her habits luxurious. She did not weary or satiate, like a mere sensual beauty. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. She certainly had the power of retaining the conquest she had won, which rarely happens except with those who are gifted with intellectual radiance and freshness. She had her hold on Antony for 11 years, when he was burdened with great public cares and duties, and when he was 42 years of age. Such a superior man as he was intellectually, and after Caesar, the leading man of the empire, a statesman as well as a soldier, would not have been enslaved so long by Cleopatra had she not possessed remarkable gifts and attainments, like those famous women who reigned in the courts of the Bourbons in the 17th and 18th centuries, and who, by their wit and social fascinations, gathered around their thrones the most distinguished men of France, and made them friends as well as admirers. The Pompadours of the world have only a brief reign, and at last become repulsive. But Cleopatra, like Maintenon, was always attractive, although she could not lay claim to the virtues of the latter. She was as politic as the French beauty, and as full of expedients to please her lord. She may have revelled in the banquets she prepared for Antony, as Esther did in those she prepared for Xerxes, but with the same intent, to please him rather than herself, and win from his weakness those political favors which in his calmer hours he might have shrunk from granting. Cleopatra was a politician as well as a luxurious beauty, and it may have been her supreme aim to secure the independence of Egypt. She wished to beguile Antony as she had sought to beguile Caesar, since they were the masters of the world, and had it in their power to crush her sovereignty and reduce her realm to a mere province of the empire. Nor is there evidence that in the magnificent banquets she gave to the Roman general she ever lost her self-control. She drank and made him drink, but retained her wits, laughing him out of patience and laughing him into patience, ascendant over him by raillery, irony, and wit. And Antony, again, although fond of banquets and ostentation, like other Roman nobles, and utterly unscrupulous and unprincipled, as Roman libertines were, was also general, statesman, and orator. He grew up amid the dangers and toils and privations of Caesar's camp. He was as greedy of honor as was his imperial master. He was a sunburnt and experienced commander, obliged to be on his guard, and ready for emergencies. No such man feels that he can afford to indulge his appetites, except on rare occasions. One of the leading peculiarities of all great generals has been their temperance. It marked Caesar, Charlemagne, Gustavus Adolphus, Frederick the Great, Cromwell, and Napoleon. When Alexander gave himself up to banquets, his conquests ended. Even such a self-indulgent, pleasure-seeking man as Louis XIV. Always maintained the decencies of society amid his dissipated courtiers. We feel that a man who could discourse so eloquently as Antony did over the dead body of Caesar was something more than a sensualist or a demagogue. He was also the finest-looking man in Rome, reminding the people, it is said, of the busts of Hercules. He was lavish, like Caesar, but like him sought popularity, and cared but little what it cost. It was probably that Cicero painted him, in his famous Philippics, in darker colors than he deserved, because he aimed to be Caesar's successor, as he probably would have been but for his infatuation for Cleopatra. Caesar sent him to Rome as master of the horse, a position next in power to that of the dictator. When Caesar was assassinated, Antony was the most powerful man of the empire. He was greater than any existing king; he was almost supreme. And after Caesar's death, when he divided his sovereignty of the world with Octavius and Lepidus, he had the fairest chance of becoming imperator. He had great military experience, the broad Orient as his domain, and half the legions of Rome under his control. It was when this great man was triumvir, sharing with only two others the empire of the world, and likely to overpower them, when he was in Asia consolidating and arranging the affairs of his vast department, that he met the woman who was the cause of all his calamities. He was then in Sicilia, and with all the arrogance of a Roman general, had sent for the Queen of Egypt to appear before him and answer to an accusation of having rendered assistance to Cassius before the fatal battle of Philippi. He had already known and admired Cleopatra in Rome, and it is not improbable that she divined the secret of his judicial summons. His envoy, struck with her beauty and intelligence, advised her to appear in her best attire. Such a woman scarcely needed such a hint. So, in making every preparation for her journey, money, ornaments, gifts, a kind of Queen of Sheba, a Zenobia in her pride and glory, a Queen Esther when she had invited the king and his minister to a banquet, she became the Cydnus, and ascended the river in a magnificent barge, such as had never been seen before, and prepared to meet her judge, not as a criminal, but as a conqueror, armed with those weapons that few mortals can resist. The barge she sat in, like a burnished throne, burned on the water, the poop was beaten gold. Purple the sails, and so perfumed that the winds were lovesick with them. The oars were silver, which to the tune of flutes kept stroke, and made the water which they beat to follow faster, as amorous of their strokes. For her own passion it beggared all description. She did lie in her pavilion, cloth of gold of tissue, or picturing that Venus, where we see the fancy outwork nature. On each side her stood pretty dimpled boys, smiling like Cupids, with diverse colored fans. Her gentlewoman, like the Nereides, so many mermaids tended her I' the eyes. At the helm, a seeming mermaid steers. From the barge. A strange invisible perfume hits the scents of the adjacent wharves. The city cast her people out upon her, and Antony, enthroned in the market place, did sit alone, whistling to the air, which but for vacancy had gone to gaze on Cleopatra too, and made a gap in nature. On arrival of this siren queen, Antony had invited her to supper, the dinner of the Romans; but she, with woman's instinct, had declined, till he should come to her, and he, with the urbanity of a polished noble (for such he probably was), complied, and found a banquet which astonished even him, accustomed as he was to senatorial magnificence, and which, with all the treasures of the East, he could not rival. From that fatal hour he was enslaved. She conquered him, not merely by her display and her dazzling beauty, but by her wit. Her very tones were music. So accomplished was she in languages that without interpreters she conversed not only with Greeks and Latins, but with Ethiopians, Jews, Arabians, Syrians, Medes, and Parthians. So dazzled and bewitched was Antony that, instead of continuing the duties of his great position, he returned with Cleopatra to Alexandria, there to keep holiday and squander riches, and, still worse, his precious time, to the shame and scandal of Rome. Inglorious and without excuse, a Samson at the feet of Delilah, or a Hercules throwing away his club to seize the distaff of Omphale, confessing to the potency of that mysterious charm which the sage at the court of an Eastern prince pronounced the strongest power on earth. Never was a strong man more enthralled than was Antony by this bewitching woman, who exhausted every art to please him. She played at dice with him, drank with him, hunted with him, rambled with him, jested with him, angled with him, flattering and reproving him by turn, always having some new device of pleasure to gratify his senses or stimulate his curiosity. Thus passed the winter of 41 '40, and in the spring he was recalled to Bourne by political dissensions there. At this stage, however, it would seem that ambition was paramount with him, not love, for his wife Fulvia having died, he did not marry Cleopatra, but Octavia, sister of Octavius, his fellow triumvir and general rival. It was evidently from political considerations that he married Octavia, who was a stately and noble woman, but tedious in her dignity and unattractive in her person. And what a great commentary on Roman rank! The sister of a Roman grandee seemed to the ambitious general a greater match than the Queen of Egypt. How this must have piqued the proud daughter of the Ptolemies, that she, a queen, with all her charms, was not the equal in the eye of Antony to the sister of Caesar's heir. But she knew her power, and stifled her resentment, and waited for her time. She too had a political end to gain, and was too politic to give way to anger and reproaches. She was anything but the impulsive woman that some suppose, but a great actress and artist, as some women are when they would conquer, even in their loves, which, if they do not feign, at least they know how to make appear greater than they are. For about 3 years Antony cut loose from Cleopatra and pursued his military career in the East, as the rival of Octavius might, having in view the sovereignty that Caesar had bequeathed to the strongest man. But his passion for Cleopatra could not long be suppressed, neither from reasons of state nor from the respect he must have felt for the admirable conduct of Octavia, who was devoted to him, and who was one of the most magnanimous and reproachless women of antiquity. And surely he must have had some great qualities to call out the love of the noblest and proudest woman of the age, in spite of his many vices, and his abandonment to a mad passion, forgetful alike both of fame and duty. He had not been 2 years in Athens, the headquarters of his eastern department, before he was called upon to chastise the Parthians, who had thrown off the Roman yoke and invaded other Roman provinces. But hardly had he left Octavia and set foot again in Asia before he sent for his Egyptian mistress, and loaded her with presents, not gold and silver and precious stones and silks and curious works of art merely, but whole provinces even, Phoenicia, Syria, Sicilia, and a part of Judea and Arabia, provinces which belonged not to him, but to the Roman Empire. How indignant must have been the Roman people when they heard of such lavish presents, and presents which he had no right to give! And when the artful Cleopatra feigned illness on the approach of Octavia, pretending to be dying of love, and wasting her body by fasting and weeping by turns, and perhaps tearing her hair in a seeming paroxysm of grief, for an actress can do even this, Antony was totally disarmed, and gave up his Parthian expedition altogether, which was treason to the state, and returned to Alexandria more submissive than ever. This abandonment of duty and official trust disgusted and incensed the Romans, so that his cause was weakened. Octavius became stronger every day, and now resolved on reigning alone. This meant another civil war. How strong the party of Antony must have been to keep together and sustain him amid such scandals, treasons, and disgrace! Antony, perceiving a desperate contest before him, ending in his supremacy or ruin, put forth all his energies, assisted by the contributions of Cleopatra, who furnished 200 ships and 20,000 talents, about $20,000,000. He had 500 war vessels, besides galleys, 100,000 foot, and 12,000 horse, one of the largest armies that any Roman general had ever commanded, and he was attended by vassal kings from the East. The forces of Octavius were not so large, though better disciplined, nor was he a match for Antony in military experience. Antony, with his superior forces, wished to fight upon the land, but against his better judgment was overruled by Cleopatra, who, having reinforced him with 60 galleys, urged him to contend upon the sea. The rivals met at Actium, where was fought one of the great decisive battles of the world. For a while the fortunes of the day were doubtful, when Cleopatra, from some unexplained motive, or from panic, or possibly from a calculating policy, was seen sailing away with her ships for Egypt. And what was still more extraordinary, Antony abandoned his fleet and followed her. Had he been defeated on the sea, he still had superior forces on the land, and was a match for Octavius. His infatuation ended in a weakness difficult to comprehend in a successful Roman general. And never was infatuation followed by more tragic consequences. Was this madness sent upon him by that awful power who controls the fate of war and the destinies of nations? Who sent madness upon Nebuchadnezzar? Who blinded Napoleon at the very summit of his greatness? May not that memorable defeat have been so ordered by Providence to give consolidation and peace and prosperity to the Roman Empire, so long groaning under the complicated miseries of anarchy and civil war? If an imperial government was necessary for the existing political and social condition of the Roman world, and this is maintained by most historians, how fortunate it was that the empire fell into the hands of a man whose subsequent policy was peace, the development of resources of nations, and a vigorous administration of government. It is generally conceded that the reign of Octavius, or, as he is more generally known, Augustus Caesar, was able, enlightened, and efficient. He laid down the policy which succeeding emperors pursued, and which resulted in the peace and prosperity of the Roman world until vices prepared the way for violence. Augustus was a great organizer, and the machinery of government which he and his ministers perfected kept the empire together until it was overrun by the new Germanic races. Had Antony conquered at Actium, the destinies of the empire might have been far different. But for 200 years the world never saw a more efficient central power than that exercised by the Roman emperors or by their ministers. Imperialism at last proved fatal to genius and the higher interests of mankind, but imperialism was the creation of Julius Caesar, as a real or supposed necessity. It was efficiently and beneficently continued by his grand nephew Augustus, and its consolidated strength became an established institution which the civilized world quietly accepted. The battle of Actium virtually settled the civil war and the fortunes of Antony, although he afterwards fought bravely and energetically, but all to no purpose. And then at last his eyes were opened, and Shakespeare makes him bitterly exclaim, "All is lost! This foul Egyptian hath betrayed me. Betrayed I am! O this false soul of Egypt!" And with his ruin, the ruin of his paramour was also settled. Yet her resources were not utterly exhausted. She retired into a castle or mausoleum she had prepared for herself in case of necessity, with her most valuable treasures, and sent messengers to Antony, who reported to him that she was dead, that she had killed herself in despair. He believed it all. His wrath now vanished in his grief. He could not live, or did not wish to live, without her, and he fell upon his own sword. The wound was mortal, but death did not immediately follow. He lived to learn that Cleopatra had again deceived him, that she was still alive. Even amid the agonies of the shadow of death, and in view of this latest fatal lie of hers, he did not upbraid her, but ordered his servants to bear him to her retreat. Covered with blood, the dying general was drawn up by ropes and through a window, the only entrance to the queen's retreat that was left unbarred, into her presence, and soon expired. Shakespeare has Antony greet Cleopatra with the words, "I am dying, Egypt, dying." This suggestive theme has been enlarged in a modern song of pathetic eloquence. I am dying, Egypt dying, ebbs the crimson life tide fast, and the dark Plutonian shadows gather on the evening blast. Let thine arms, O Queen, enfold me, hush thy sobs and bow thine ear, listen to the great heart secrets, thou and thou alone must hear. Should the base plebeian rabble dare assail my name at Rome, where my noble spouse Octavia weeps within her widowed home, seek her, say the gods bear witness, altars, augurs, circling wings, that her blood with mine commingled, yet shall mount the throne of kings. As for thee, star-eyed Egyptian, glorious sorceress of the Nile, light the path to Stygian horrors with the splendors of thy smile. I can scorn the Senate's triumphs, triumphing in love like thine. Ah, no more amid the battle shall my heart exulting swell. Isis and Osiris guard thee. Cleopatra, Rome, farewell. Section 18.